Big mistake a lot of people make, not only do they get poor quality fat sources or poor quality meats, right, grain fed, things like that, but also they'll oftentimes do more of a higher protein diet rather than a high fat diet. The brain runs really well on beta hydroxybutyrate. And in the brain, so not only does it provide fuel, but also it helps increase levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor, which has a positive effect on neurogenesis. I'll tell people to do anywhere from like once a week, where they have a higher carb meal, to sometimes like every day or every other day. And usually I tell them in the evening hours, right? Because it has a positive effect on lowering stress hormone, producing serotonin and melatonin, things like that.
All right, well, David Jockers, welcome to High Intensity Health Radio.
Hey, great to be on with you, Mike.
My pleasure. So today let's talk about ketosis. I know you've been working with implementing ketogenic diets in your clinic, and what I like about your approach, David, is you're a clinician. You know, there's so many people talking about ketosis on the internet and all that, but they're not seeing clients, seeing patients. They're talking about, you know, what works for them and sharing it with the world, which is cool.
Yeah.
But you're helping a lot of people improve their lives through ketogenic diet. So one of the things I would love to start with is, I think I'm going to get this wrong, but you said something to the effect that everyone should cycle, at least at some level, into ketosis and out of ketosis. So maybe we can talk about the benefits and why you think that people should undergo this nutrition state.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so a ketogenic diet, if listeners aren't really familiar with that, is really a high good fat, low carbohydrate diet, right? And the benefit of that is it helps to improve insulin sensitivity. So in a sense, you get your blood sugar down, right? And insulin, we know, is a pro-inflammatory hormone. It's a great hormone, saves our lives, right? Because high blood sugar can be extremely damaging to all the cells of our body. However, high insulin also promotes inflammation. So by getting insulin levels down, that's a critical factor with ketogenic diet. And then ketones are actually a preferred fuel source for your brain. So your brain really runs well off ketones. So it's an alternative fuel source to sugar, and actually allows you to go long periods of time between meals, helps create, in a sense, a level of metabolic efficiency where the mitochondria within the cells upregulate. So it's called mitochondrial biogenesis. Your body's able to produce more ATP energy through the electron transport system, and in a sense you just become a lot more efficient. And so that's a phenomenal physiological state to be in. So it's something, it's in a sense, it's a goal that I have for all my clients, is to be able to experience that. Okay, now like you're saying, it's like not everybody's able to actually get into that, and I know we'll talk about that as we go on, but it is a phenomenal state to be in. And it's a state when you're in ketosis that is very much, it's tough for cancer to grow in that environment, because cancer cells don't run effectively off ketones, but they do run off of sugar. And so if you keep blood sugar down, but you provide an alternative fuel source for the muscle cells, brain cells of your body, then you're going to feel good and you're going to experience life at a high level without getting, a delirious effect of rapid cancer cell growth and things like that, degenerative processes going on in your body.
Yeah, a lot of benefits. But I love how you said it's not for everyone, because this is a state where you talked about the mitochondrial biogenesis. So these are the powerhouses of our cells, are making more and more of them. But some of your patients just don't have healthy mitochondria. So you can load up this fat, make these ketones, but that next step of making the mitochondria may not happen, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, right? So like I was saying, getting into a state of ketosis is a goal. Sometimes a long-term goal, sometimes it can be a short-term goal that I have for every client that comes in my office. And so the reason why is that, like, if somebody, for example, if they have extreme adrenal fatigue, if their mitochondria are severely damaged, let's say they're really low, they have really low, poor functioning thyroid, right? Now, poor functioning thyroid is going to also have poor functioning mitochondria, because T3 plays a big role with mitochondrial formation. And so if that's the case, we need to get the adrenals and the thyroid under control first, right? Get that stable, then we can start to pursue a state of ketosis. And that individual, just based on their genetics, based on, in a sense, damage that's taken place to their body before we even got started, they may never be able to be in like ketosis for, let's say, 30 days straight. They may have to cycle in and out, where they might be in ketosis for 12 hours, then out of ketosis for 12 hours, and then back into ketosis. And that's actually a phenomenal place to be in too, because you're still getting benefits of reducing inflammation, supporting mitochondrial biogenesis, cellular autophagy, where you're starting to break down old, dead, decaying cells and starting to, in a sense, your body just starts to build new, healthy, stronger cells when we're in that state. So there's a lot of benefit to that. So it just depends on the individual. And some people, you know, if there's clinicians watching, there's some people that, they're just a lot, we know they're just a lot more fragile and they can't really handle going long periods of time between meals. They have very, very unstable blood sugar, and it just takes them longer to create the metabolic efficiency to be able to handle that.
Mm-hmm. And so do they work through that over time with your help, or can they support their blood sugar with supplements? I mean, what are some of the ways to like accelerate this process?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always the goal, is that they're able to work through it. And there's a lot of ways that they can support it. So for example, they could do things like really using things that are just easier to produce ketones, like MCT oil, for example, right? So coconut oil, or even just a processed MCT oil, where they, in a sense, they take the coconut oil, they take out, you know, the portions that aren't in MCT oil, and it's just concentrated capric and caprylic acid, and using that to produce ketones can be very, very effective. So having people put that in their morning tea, right, can be, you know, a great approach, right? So doing that to support ketone production can be outstanding. Or using it as a cooking oil, putting it on as a salad dressing, things like that can be a great approach. And then there's different supplements. So things like, for example, chromium, right? So chromium is a great supplement. A lot of people are deficient in that mineral, and chromium really helps with blood sugar sensitivity. It takes that GLUT4 receptor, brings it up near the the membrane of the cell membrane, and it's almost like a window where it helps, you know, with basically getting sugar into the cell where it can be utilized, right, by the mitochondria. So that's great. Carnitine is another good one, because carnitine takes the fat, puts it into the mitochondria, and a lot of people don't have a good carnitine shuttle, right? They're consuming all this fat, but they're really not getting it actually into the cell, right, or into the mitochondria to be used. And so carnitine can be a really, really profound supplement. And then you also have to look, some people, they're not producing enough hydrochloric acid and bile, right? So they've got issues with even metabolizing the fat to begin with that they're consuming. So you get them started on things like avocados, right, olive oil, butter, things that have a lot of good fats, but they're longer chain fats. And they need to be metabolized. And if their digestive juices aren't flowing well, they're not going to metabolize them well. Therefore, they're not going to be able to use those fatty acids for an energy source. So all those things need to be addressed in order to get that person into a good, stable state of ketosis.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. A lot of people have their gallbladders removed, particularly women. And so
Absolutely.
we're wanting them to eat more fats, but then they're not absorbing them as well. So, because I get this email a lot from people online, like, "Hey, Mike, I have my gallbladder removed. What should I do?" So coach us through, you know, that process.
Yeah, so when the gallbladder is removed, right, it's really, you know, I have several articles on my website that really talk about what to do to improve gallbladder function. And I get the same email. People are like, "Oh, you know, this article was great, but my gallbladder, I don't have a gallbladder." Right. And I'm like, well, you know what? You want to do the same exact things, whether you have a gallbladder or not, because it's the liver that actually produces the bile. And then the gallbladder is really a storehouse for the bile. So that way, when we do take in a larger fatty meal, we've got that extra support, the extra bile support to emulsify, to have an antimicrobial effect, things like that. So even if somebody if they don't have a gallbladder, they can still produce bile, they're just not gonna be able to produce a whole lot for a meal. So doing small amounts, like if they're doing an avocado, certainly no more than one avocado in a sitting, right, and no other fat sources with it. Maybe even better, a half avocado, right? Supporting hydrochloric acid. So there's things they can do for that. They can also take supplements like betaine HCl and pepsin, because oftentimes those go hand in hand. Poor stomach acid, poor bile production, that those go hand in hand. They can do things like apple cider vinegar, right? Apple cider vinegar and ginger. You know, one of my favorite drinks, and it's something whenever I do shopping tours, one of the things I do, I take patients around our local Whole Foods and actually go shopping with them, show them in a sense what to get. And one of the things I always try to get them doing is Gingerade. I don't know if you've heard that, but it's Bragg's Gingerade. So it's ginger, apple cider vinegar, stevia, and water. Okay, and it's simple and easy. And I show them, I'm like, you can make this at home. Like, it's so easy to make at home, or you can just buy it. It's like $2 or $3 bottle. right? Buy, a case of them or something like that, stick them in your refrigerator, drink those throughout the day, because ginger is so good for stimulating, so is apple cider vinegar, for stimulating those digestive juices. So it'll help prep the liver. And especially if you take that, let's say, drink some of that like 30 minutes before a meal, okay? Now, in a sense, you're preparing the liver, you're preparing the stomach to produce more hydrochloric acid, you're creating more efficiency for the body as far as producing digestive juices. So that's another great thing, using bitters, things like dandelion, cilantro, milk thistle, different things like that can be great. Parsley is another great one. So maybe doing some juicing or adding those things to salads can be a fantastic approach. Sometimes doing smaller meals is a key thing. And I know in your book you talked a lot about vagal tone. So vagal tone is critical. So sitting down, right? And in our society, of course, it's always fast food. Exactly. Right. It's like we look at food as just another thing we're doing, and it's not a time to rest and process. Right. So if my patients, if they have a really busy schedule, I have them doing a lot of liquid foods and raw foods during the day, smoothies and shakes, because you don't need as much digestive juices to metabolize a smoothie, right? It's simple and easy on the body, so it's easy, right? Or maybe a salad or something along those lines. It's very, very easy on the body, as opposed to a larger meal, right? So if we're gonna have steak or something along those lines, obviously it can be very healthy for us, but we also have to realize it's going to take a lot more digestive juices to break down. So what we want to do is we want to take time, be in a relaxed position for at least 15 minutes before we eat that meal. And then I always tell them, and this is something I try to practice, I'll take 3 long deep breaths before I dig into that first meal. Sometimes, like in our household, we pray before the meal. Yeah. And I was thinking about it, I'm like, not only is the prayer amazing, but how are you when you're praying? You're in a much more relaxed state, right? So there's physiological benefit on your digestive system, on your vagal tone, by taking the time to pray before your meal. Take time to be in gratitude for the food and things like that. And so taking that time to help relax your system, consume your meal. And I always tell them your largest meal, like in a sense, your meal with meat in it. Because I'll recommend my clients typically not to have meat more than once a day. Right? I'm a huge fan of grass-fed beef, wild-caught salmon, things like that, but once a day, right? Do protein shakes, do things like that throughout the day. And when you do that, the key is, again, you do it at the time of day when you have the least amount of stress. So you're able to take your time, prepare your digestive system before the meal, and then take at least an hour, like the old kind of siesta. If you're gonna do it at lunch, it should be like the siesta idea. Yeah. For most people, our least stressful time of the day is kind of at the end of the day, right? At least take an hour to relax, right? Maybe check a few emails, maybe have a casual conversation with your spouse, but don't run off to, the next event or next activity, or just get back into, a grueling schedule. That's not a good idea. So take that time to relax, allow the digestive juices to pump up, so you can really effectively metabolize it. Yeah.
I love that we're getting back to the basics, and that's one of the things that I remember reading in your blog post, that you have to cover the basics before you can start to get in ketosis. So I think people are hearing about this and thinking, oh my gosh, this is something I have to do, but they're forgetting about sleep, stress reduction, like you said, mindful eating, really important things, thyroid, adrenal health. Any other basic kind of foundations that we could talk about before we build into some of the details and the minutia?
Well, you got to keep stress under control, right? So if you were in a period of time in your life where it's just massive amount of stress, ketosis may not be the best goal for you unless you've got a lot of experience with it. And the reason being is the more stress you're under, the more stress hormone you're going to produce. Stress hormone's gonna throw up your blood sugar, right? So blood sugar is going to go up. And in a sense, you could have a blood sugar roller coaster, right? So keeping stress under control is really, really key. Making sure you're eating well, making sure you're sleeping well, making sure you've got adequate amounts of B vitamins in your system. Adaptogenic herbs oftentimes can be very, very helpful. Different things like that can be profound. Sometimes glutathione boosting agents for many individuals can be really, really, really good for just keeping stress under control and adapting well. So you want to, in a sense, you want to be mindful of how are you adapting to your daily stress, like the stress that you're under. How well are you adapting to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in your clinical practice, are most patients not adapting to that very well? I mean, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Probably...
I mean, just like your general society, most people are poor adapters. You know, they're just not adapting well to the stresses that they're under in life. And that's really the hallmark of healthy aging, is how well you're adapting to the stress that you're under on a regular basis. Yeah. And of course, most people, they're under a lot of stress and they have poor adaptation qualities because nobody's really come along and taught them how to adapt effectively. And so therefore, they're accelerating their aging process. And that's what we're trying to teach, is saying, hey, let's do the things that we can do in our lifestyle to help reduce stress on your body, right? And help boost your adaptive potential. Yeah. And a ketogenic diet can be a great approach to helping boost the adaptogenic potential.
We'd love to talk about that. I have a friend, Alessandro Ferretti, and he's looked at heart rate variability, which, as you know, for the listeners, that's a direct measurement of parasympathetic or sympathetic tone.
Yes.
And he's found that a lot of improvements in heart rate variability with ketosis. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think like you mentioned, the vagal nerve, that nerve that's innervating the GI tract, I think it's affected by fat. And so I just wanted to see if you had any feedback on that one.
Well, I would say one of the big reasons why it is because you're not having the blood sugar roller coaster. The amazing thing about being in ketosis is your blood sugar stays very, very, very stable, right? In fact, one of the ways you can know that you're in ketosis is if you do check your blood sugar, and let's say if it's under 80, okay, yet you feel really good, right? Like oftentimes when I used to check it, it would be like 62, which most people would be like, if your blood sugar is 62 and you're not in ketosis, you're jittery. I mean, your body's going into panic. Your adrenals, your stress hormones bumping up because it thinks it's, in a sense, in a state of, that you're starving. And obviously, low blood sugar to your brain could leave you, you could, in a sense, just pass out, right? Or even die. So it's survival. So if your blood sugar is low, yet you feel really good, right? Your brain is sharp, your mood is really stable. That's a sign you're in that stable ketosis. And that's what happens. Your blood sugar stays very stable. And when blood sugar stays stable for a period of time, your adrenals don't have to work as hard. So you get less of the adrenals kicking in. Therefore, you're going to have greater parasympathetic tone.
Love that.
When your blood sugar's all over the place, okay, now your adrenals have to do a lot more modulating, right? And that's, think about cortisol. It's a glucocorticoid. Its main job is to keep glucose levels stable. So it's constantly monitoring, and checking that out.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the things that you talked about in the blog post, and I've heard you say before, is when you're in ketosis, you have a lot more emotional resilience. You're more stable to ups and downs. So does that tie in again to the adrenals not firing all the time because the blood sugar is low?
I really think so. I think so. I think it has to do with that, and then the fact that, when the adrenals are kicking in and when you have insulin cycling up and blood sugar going up and down, like you have an insulin spike, things like that, you're gonna have a lot more inflammation, right? And that inflammation is gonna affect your brain chemistry, right? Because obviously we know inflammation somewhere can result in inflammation everywhere. For many of us, we're very susceptible to inflammation in our brain. And that inflammation in our brain can increase levels of irritability, anger, depression, anxiety, all those types of things. Yeah. So by keeping inflammation under control, keeping blood sugar stable, keeping insulin, cortisol, right, and how they cycle in and out to keep blood sugar stable, keeping that under control and keeping our body very sensitive to those, we create that metabolic efficiency, which therefore results in less overall inflammation, better overall brain function.
Before we move on a little bit further, I want to talk about ketones in the brain in particular. So we've kind of been talking about this in the big picture, but let's zoom in a little bit. And I know you have a lot of details here. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, this really cool molecule. What does it do in our brain to really kind of enhance cognition, like you mentioned? Just back up. You mentioned, just to reinforce, the way that you know that you're in ketosis is because you're really mentally clear, that the fog is lifted. So what do the ketones do into our brain?
Well, they provide fuel. That's the cool thing. So when I was going through chiropractic school, I was taught that the brain needs sugar, right? And that's what most people are taught in medical school, right? We're always taught the brain depends on sugar. It's the most metabolically active organ in the body. It's consuming, some level of percentage of the sugar and calories, in a sense, on a regular basis. And it's not actually true. What we know today is that ketones actually are a preferred fuel source, that the brain runs really well on beta-hydroxybutyrate. And in the brain, so not only does it provide fuel, but also it helps increase levels of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor, which has a positive effect on neurogenesis, so the formation of new nerve cells, of synaptic density, so the little gaps between the nerve cells, right, has a positive effect on that. So we actually get, in a sense, just an overall enhanced metabolic effect in the brain. And then also the effect of ketosis also has a positive effect on, we talked about autophagy. So cellular autophagy, which is key for the brain. Like we know that people with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, degenerative conditions of the brain, they have lowered levels of autophagy where the body isn't able to break down the old cells that are, in a sense, have a lower level of integrity. They've been broken down by oxidative stress and things like that. And the body just hasn't had a chance to metabolize them because it's dealing with a lot of stress from blood sugar imbalances and all that kind of stuff. When we get into that state of ketosis, the body, to some degree, is like, hey, this is almost like a hibernated state where we're going to really focus on repair, right? So repair becomes one of the dominant features, and part of the repair process is cellular autophagy, where we chew up the old cells, rebuild, and create new, healthier, stronger cells.
Love that information about the brain, Dr. Jockers, but let's dive back a little bit and talk more. We talked about inflammation. Let's talk about one aspect of the immune system and cancer. And you talked about autophagy and P53 and so forth. Let's take a deep dive and talk about how ketosis can help prevent cancer.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of different mechanisms for that. But of course, what we know is that with cancer cells are defined by, they have a defective mitochondria, right? So there's mitochondrial damage. So there's a book Dr. Thomas Seyfried wrote, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. Phenomenal book, right? And he's a researcher, and he talked all about how there's mitochondrial dysfunction as one of the key features with cancer cells. So the mitochondria has been damaged. Mitochondria is what takes oxygen and utilizes that for energy. Now, what we know is Otto Warburg, I believe it was in the 1930s, he won a Nobel Peace Prize, and one of his key findings was that, in a sense, cancer is a metabolic disease, right? And that in a sense, oxygen doesn't run on oxygen, and it depends on sugar as its primary fuel, okay? And sugar goes through, it starts, in a sense, with creating just 2 ATP, right? Whereas oxidative phosphorylation, electron transport system, creates 36, a lot more metabolically efficient to produce energy through using oxygen, right? And one of the waste products of glycolysis, which is what cancer cells are using, is a lot of acid, right? So they're producing a lot of acid. Many of our, the listeners here may have heard of cancer. There's like an acidic environment. You got to alkalize and all this kind of stuff. And really, what it comes down to is we want to reduce the fuel source for cancer, because cancer is really fast-growing cells, and they reproduce quickly, and they grab up a lot of the fuel that's in our bloodstream, right? So they want to grab up nutrients, they want to grab up sugar. So ketosis provides an alternative fuel source to where we're able to really survive and thrive by keeping our blood sugar low. Like if we constantly are eating sugars and starches, our blood sugar constantly goes up. And oftentimes, like if I were to have even something healthier, like a big sweet potato, my blood sugar, if I check my blood sugar right after that, it's going to be up over 100, right? Mm-hmm. And so now that higher blood sugar, that's going to be a fuel source, and those cancer cells are going to come out, grab that, and it's going to help fuel them. They have a lot more insulin receptors, right? At least 10 times more insulin receptors than normal cells. And so they're just a lot better at grabbing the sugar out of the bloodstream. However, if I'm in a state of ketosis and I'm able to keep my blood sugar down 50, 60, 70, in that range, there's a lot less circulating sugar. So the cancer cells have a lot less of the fuel that they need. Therefore, they're going to be weaker. Okay, just like if you were to, starve yourself, right? You're going to be weaker. Also, cancer cells, they actually create an antioxidant defense system from sugar. So therefore, basically what happens there is they're not able to protect themselves as effectively from our body's own immune system. And so we put them in a weakened state. And then whatever else you're doing, whether you're doing natural therapies, right, like IV vitamin C or hyperbaric oxygen, or if you're doing your conventional medicine therapies like radiation or chemotherapy, it's going to be a lot more effective because the cancer is already in a weakened state. It's not able to protect itself as effectively. So that's critical. And then there's an aspect of the P53 gene, which is really how, in a sense, people develop cancer to begin with. And so all of us have a P53 gene in every cell, and its job is to regulate cellular mitosis. So when cells reproduce, The P53 gene is like the security guard. It just makes sure that the DNA, right, looks healthy, looks good. And then it allows that cell to now go on with its life. And so what happens though is when we're under a lot of oxidative stress throughout the course of our life, we get damage to this P53 gene, and then we're no longer able to guard against abnormal cell growth, right? P53 gene, if it sees something abnormal, it stops mitosis, tries to correct it, or it signals cell death, apoptosis. So again, if P53 gene becomes damaged, now we lose that. And so what we found is that things like intermittent fasting, ketosis, they help to boost something called AMPK, right? And so adenosine monophosphate protein kinase. And so that actually helps with the regulating and in a sense helps to protect, AMPK helps protect P53 gene. So it's powerful. So it helps to protect it from oxidative stress. And just in general, just like we talked about before, being in ketosis is going to reduce the amount of oxidative stress around our cells, therefore less stress on the P53 gene, better P53 gene function.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I love there's many mechanisms here that you're diving into that people can, so there's so much to get excited about, right? Yeah. So it's not only that we're starving our body of sugar, and sugar is problematic for, like you said, the antioxidant mechanisms and Warburg effect, but ketones themselves affect all these other pathways, AMPK and P53, so it's like, why shouldn't someone try this? It's really fascinating. So I think a way to, the next segue that I'd love to tease out, the question is testing and assessment. So you mentioned your fasting blood sugars and post-meal blood sugars. You said after a sweet potato 110, most people would die to have a fasting blood sugar of 110, right? In America at least. So let's talk about ways that we can assess this, and what do you do with your patients that are trying to learn whether or not they're in ketosis?
Absolutely. So there's a couple different ways we can measure. Okay, and there's a lot of blogs and information out there. A lot of people that really try to biohack. They measure everything. We kind of have that kind of a world. We want to measure all kinds of stuff, and so the gold standard way at this period of time is going to be blood ketone strips. You can get a Precision Extra blood ketone meter. It's not expensive, $40 I think. But then the actual strips they're like $4 a piece. And so over time, if you're trying to check several times a day, it's going to cost you a good amount of money. And some people do that. If you have that, if you have the ability to do that, that's great. Okay. You can also check through, there is a breath meter. Okay. And I always forget the name of it. It's the Ketonix breath meter. It's like $150. Okay. And it's a software that comes with it. And you're basically breathing into it, and it's checking your breath acetone levels, which is a byproduct of, which is basically a ketone, right? So it's checking that and how your body, one of the ways your body in a sense eliminates acetate is, or acetone is through the breath. So it's checking that, and they've got data, and you can kind of measure it and keep a lot of data right there on your computer in that software system. So that's a great approach. It's $150 and then that's it, right? And then you basically can just keep track of your data all the time. So that's a great way. A lot of people do that. It's also less invasive. It's easier to breathe into something than to prick and poke yourself, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you enjoy pricking and poking yourself, you can also check your blood glucose. And I know we talked before the interview here, and it's like if you're checking your glucose levels and you're under 80, yet you feel really good, right? You're very mentally focused, you're able to concentrate well, you don't feel jittery, you don't have anxiety, you're not irritable, then that's a sign that you're in ketosis, because typically when your blood sugar starts dropping under 80 and you are not producing efficient amount of ketones or utilizing them well, then you're going to start to notice all the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia, and that is a terrible state to be in, because when you're in hypoglycemic, the cells are starving and they start to combust, and in a sense you can create excitatory reactions. So you can cause all kinds of cell damage to your brain, your nervous system. It's just a terrible way to be in as functional medicine doctors. We do everything we can to keep people out of a hypoglycemic state, because we understand how delirious that can be on somebody's overall health. So if you're producing the ketones, your blood sugar will be low, right? Under 80, sometimes even down to 50, yet you'll feel really good. You'll feel really stable, and that's a great sign. And then like for myself, really, I just go off of how I feel. I've been around, I've been doing this long enough to just know when I'm in ketosis or not. And I think that's a great place for people to get, is where we just have a great level of biofeedback, and just a great level of understanding of how our body's responding to things. So for me, typically, like I like to do intermittent fasting, and I'll oftentimes eat my first meal 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, something like that, and keep my meals between usually like a 6 to 8 hour eating window. And so if I'm feeling really good at 11 o'clock, let's say 12 o'clock, and I just feel really, really good, I'm not hungry, I feel very mentally alert, I feel like, I can work for 6 hours straight, and I'm just excited about life, it's a sign that I'm in ketosis. If in the morning, at some point, a period of time in the morning, I feel like I need to take a nap, right? Or if I feel irritable, okay, just in a sense, nothing necessarily provoked it, but I just feel like extra irritable, or I have anxiety or jitteriness, anything along those lines, a sign I'm not in ketosis and I should get some sort of fuel in my system as quickly as possible because I'm having a hypoglycemic reaction. So that's kind of how I gauge it.
Yeah, and you're keto adapted, right? So is there anything in your lifestyle, have you correlated like sleep loss or stress, like all those things we've talked about, where it's harder for your body, even though you are keto adapted, you've been doing this to get into ketosis?
Absolutely. Right. There's a couple big things. I would say for me, the most important thing is actually bowel movements, right? Bowel motility. Like for me, I'll get up in the morning and I usually drink, I would say 32 ounces of water easily in the first 20 minutes in the morning. Okay, and for me it's very important to move my bowels in the first, at least once in the first hour to 2 hours in the morning, just in a sense clear everything out. And I think that has to do with how the microbiome works. If you're not, you're creating more fermentation, right, in your gut, probably going to produce more LPS, different things like that, just more inflammation overall, and that's going to cause your adrenals to kick up, and now you're going to start to have a blood sugar roller coaster. So for me, it's so critical to flush my system, super hydrate my body, and get everything out. And that's a big thing that I teach my patients is that if you eat a meal, all the food contents, all the waste products of that meal should be out of your body within a minimum of 24 hours, right? I mean, ideally, a lot less. Ideally, or I should say a maximum of 24 hours. Ideally, more like 12 to 18 hours, right? Should have gone through your system, your body extracted the nutrients, and then you get rid of the waste. The less time that it's sitting in your gut fermenting, the better to some degree, right? Obviously, you don't want it to go right through you.
Right.
But I would say 12 hours, right, to 18 hours is like a sweet spot. You can get it in and through your system in that period of time, awesome, right? Definitely no more than 24 hours. And most people inside here aren't doing that.
No. Yeah, it's several days.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Which is frightening. That really caught me off guard. I was not expecting you to say motility, but it's really interesting now that you say that. I'm thinking about all these things in my head, scenarios of short chain fatty acids, like you said, intestinal permeability, LPS.
That's right.
They're driving these pathways. That's really interesting.
Yes.
Let's circle back a little bit to post-meal blood sugar. So for me, for example, I'm not going to spend $4 or $5 on a ketone strip. It's just ridiculous. So I'm going to go the inexpensive route and directly look at blood glucose. And I don't like venipuncture, but I don't mind poking my finger, just how it is, right? But so for people that are getting into this and they need like your experience, so you can say, okay, I'm in ketosis, I can tell my brain energy level and stuff like that, right? But people want to test and get numbers. What is a good post-meal blood sugar if they're in ketosis state?
Yeah, it's a great question. So kind of the sweet spot for ketosis is really 50 to 80 in that kind of a blood sugar range, right? Whatever that is, milligrams over deciliter or something like that. So that 50 to 80 is kind of the sweet spot, right? And particularly between meals. Sometimes it could bump up a little bit, right? But if your body is very keto adapted, it'll just go down, especially if you use things like chromium, stuff like that just help get the sugar out of the system and into the cell quicker. The longer blood sugar's up, the less your body's going to produce ketones, right? And you're just become, in a sense, back into glycolysis and things like that. So you want to get that sugar out of the bloodstream quicker. Now, most people, when they eat a meal, their blood sugar is going way up, right? They have a high postprandial blood glucose, right? So if it's up over 90, 100, 110, you're going to be out of ketosis without a doubt. So basically 50 to 80 is kind of the sweet spot. That's kind of where you want to be all the time, unless you are trying to cycle out of it, which nothing wrong with that at times, okay? And the more that, again, that you get into a keto adapted state and you use different things, like you can put apple cider vinegar on your food, which has been shown to lower the glycemic index, glycemic response of foods. You can do things like chromium, carnitine, vanadium is really good. Oftentimes, bitter herbs can be really good for regulating blood glucose. Gynema is another herb that's really good. Bitter melon, right? Different things like that can be really effective to get blood sugar down under control.
Love it.
Yep. So like if I have a larger meal, right, I'll take a multivitamin that has a high dose of chromium, vanadium in there, right? Why? Because I want to use those minerals in order to get my blood sugar under control. Also, maybe put apple cider vinegar on it, something along those lines. You can also do something like do some high intensity exercise right before, right? Stimulate those GLUT4 receptors. So, do 10 burpees or something along those lines, okay? And then boom, your body's more responsive to taking that sugar in, keeping your blood sugar low and stable.
All right, David, let's go back a little bit to carbohydrates. Okay, so we hear a lot of buzz that people should cycle in and out of ketosis. So talk to us about like what carbs are okay, how often should people carbohydrate cycle, and when, frequency, just some of the overview there.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of variability with that, and it really depends on how well you do in ketosis, or if you're an athlete, or things like that, right? But in general, I'll tell people to do anywhere from like once a week, where they have a higher carb meal, to sometimes like every day or every other day. And usually I tell them in the evening hours, right? Because it has a positive effect on lowering stress hormone, producing serotonin and melatonin, things like that. So the healthier carbs that we're gonna utilize are hypoallergenic carbs, right? So, a lot of people have inflammatory responses to grains and things like that. So usually I'm recommending things like sweet potatoes, yams, pumpkin, squash, different things like that can be a lot better. Now, some people tell me, well, I do really well with rice. And if they do well with rice, I'm like, that's okay. We're going to turn it into anti-inflammatory rice. We're going to put a whole bunch of turmeric in there. Turmeric has a positive effect on PPAR's receptor genes, and that helps to regulate blood glucose, right? So we put a bunch of turmeric in there. We put apple cider vinegar on there, which lowers the glycemic load. We're also going to put a little black pepper, which activates the curcuminoids in the turmeric, maybe some Mediterranean herbs for some more antioxidants in there, and olive oil on it, so we get more polyphenols, right? So we're going to turn it into more of an anti-inflammatory rice rather than just straight rice.
I'm coming over to eat that.
Things like rice and quinoa are phenomenal carriers for herbs like turmeric, right? So if you're going to have it, make sure you utilize that as a carrier, right? And that would be in a sense a healthier carb. So we'll add that in, whether it's a small amount in the evening, every night. For some individuals, they do better with that. Other people every other day, other people every third day, other people once a week, right? It really just depends on how do you feel when you're in a state of ketosis. How do you feel when you're on a low carb diet? And that's the key question you got to ask yourself there.
I love the flexibility here. It's not just like dogmatic and saying no, because some people are saying no, you can't have more than 60 grams or 80 grams or whatever it is of carbohydrates. But you're like, look, just how do you feel? How's your energy level? And most importantly, how's your blood glucose and things like that. So really important. Now, athletes are starting to adopt this. So before we talk about what ketosis can do for athletes, to talk about muscle and why muscle is so important for weight loss, but also how we can improve muscle health with ketosis. Yeah,
absolutely. This is a common question you get is, well, if I'm not eating those carbs, I'm not going to be able to perform and I'm going to lose muscle mass. Okay, and that's not necessarily true. And the reason why is that when you're in ketosis, you have a higher fasting blood leucine level, and leucine is a key branched chain amino acid that has an anabolic effect on the body, meaning that it preserves lean body mass. And that's really, really critical. And so basically the body is saying, I want to keep lean body mass, and you're going to actually stimulate more fat burning mechanisms. So you'll actually maintain your muscle mass. In fact, there's a lot of people out there, and I'm one of them, where we get our best workouts in a fasted state of ketosis, and we're fasting for a long period of time. Right, I just had my baby boys and I had to rearrange my schedule. I used to work out like early in the morning, and I'm working out now usually around lunch hour, 11, 12 o'clock, and I actually feel a lot better with it. And I'm in a longer fast, and I actually feel really, really good with it. And I've noticed positive changes with my lean body mass, just overall strength levels, with my muscle levels, and it feels great. And the scientific reason would be high blood leucine levels, right? So I'm in ketosis, blood leucine's high, right? Also, I'm getting a higher human growth hormone release, and that's extremely good for lean body mass, strength, anti-aging, all those types of things.
So for folks that don't know about muscle protein synthesis and leucine, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's a key kind of understanding so people know about leucine.
Yeah, so just like we talked about, leucine is a branched chain amino acid, right? And it stimulates an anabolic response in our body where not only do we preserve muscle, but we can also build muscle. Like there's foods like whey protein, for example, that help boost leucine levels, which again creates that anabolic effect where our body's able to build muscle mass, right? Stimulates protein synthesis in our system.
Love it. Fantastic. So let's kind of finish up with athletes. What considerations should athletes understand? I mean, I've done a lot of bike racing and skiing throughout my life, and the adage, or kind of the notion, is that the day before an event you just carb load and do all this stuff, which can make people fat, make you tired, make you sick. So what sort of advice do you have for athletes?
Yeah, so one big thing would be, there's a lot of athletes that actually train in ketosis, right? Like there's a guy, Ben Greenfield, he's got a great podcast. He talks all about it. He'll get himself into ketosis. I've got a good friend that does this. He's measuring himself, but not everybody, right? And so typically with athletes, what I'm telling them to do is to do what we had talked about before, where we're doing more carbs in the evening, right? Not during the day, but in the evening, and more anti-inflammatory carbs. So most athletes, they're eating a big pizza, they're just loading up, bread, Subway sandwiches, all kinds of stuff like that. So anti-inflammatory carbs are going to be a lot better. And the idea that they need excessive amounts of carbs, big pasta dishes, things like that, that's not true, right? Have, big sweet potato or maybe 2 small sweet potatoes, have, half a bowl of rice, something along those lines, have a lot of good fat, lots of antioxidants, tons of, good high quality phytonutrient-rich vegetables, things like that. We want to keep, overall, the goal should be keeping inflammation under control. There should be less of a focus on calorie or carb loading and more of a focus on how do I keep muscle inflammation under control so I can adapt effectively. And so getting a lot more phytonutrients and keeping blood sugar more stable, even if that it doesn't necessarily mean we need to do real low carb, but moderate carb, right? Keeping blood sugar stable is going to have a much better effect at reducing overall muscle inflammation.
Love it. Fantastic. Yeah. And a lot of people have sick or fatty muscle, right? Like diabetics.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Non-alcoholic. Yeah. Yep. Fantastic. So before we go to some final questions, is there anything about ketosis or high-fat, low-carb diets that you want to share that we didn't get to cover?
Yeah. So one big thing would be, a lot of times people will go on they're like, okay, I'm going to do, obviously the Atkins diet, things like that were real popular. Okay, and there's a big difference between what we're talking about here and an Atkins diet, or what a lot of people teach with a ketogenic diet, which is, we're eating lots of bacon and we're eating, just butter on, everything and things like that. And I'm a huge fan of grass-fed butter. Really what we're trying to do is get a lot of clean foods. And you really want to think about, your mindset should be, I want to get an incredibly high level of phytonutrients into my body. And it just so happens that things like grass-fed butter may not have the plant phytonutrients, but it's got butyrate in it, great for the gut lining. It's got conjugated linoleic acid in it. It's got tons of vitamin A, like a fat-soluble retinol, things like that, which are fantastic. So the grass-fed is so much better than the grain-fed. That's a key principle. And the big mistake a lot of people make, not only do they get poor quality fat sources or poor quality meats, right, grain-fed, things like that, but also they'll oftentimes do more of a higher protein diet rather than a high fat diet. Like if you were to tell somebody, okay, just eat meat and vegetables for dinner, do this, do that. That's what a lot of people do, is like the old bodybuilder diet where they're doing chicken and broccoli for dinner. And then they wonder, 2 or 3 hours later, they wonder why they're starving and they're craving ice cream. And the problem was the high protein turned into sugar, right? Gluconeogenesis in the liver, boom, we turn that into sugar. We need the fat. So I'll tell them, okay, have a big, gigantic bowl of broccoli, Brussels sprouts, something like that, some sort of a steamed vegetable, maybe a side salad, and then put 2 tablespoons of grass-fed butter and melt that in there. Okay, when you have your meat, so if you're having a chicken breast, make sure you cook it on put a lot of coconut oil down, and this is key for reducing carcinogenic substances that can be produced as well. Put a lot of coconut oil down on your pan, okay, to protect the meat, and then pour that oil on the chicken afterwards. It actually tastes a lot better that way, and you get so much more of the good fats, which will help produce satiety, help put you in ketosis, and help keep your blood sugar stable in the evening, overnight while you're sleeping, and that's just so important.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into like bodybuilding and weightlifting, I was always craving carbs at night, and it was for that reason. You were cutting out the fats, right? So it was really interesting. Awesome tip.
And that's why you'll need to eat 6 meals a day or 7
Right.
meals a day, because you don't have enough of the good fats. Blood sugar's constantly going up and down.
Yeah, excellent tip that a lot of people don't understand. So thanks
Yeah.
for articulating that. So 3 final questions. They can be short and brief, but we want
Yeah.
to get to know you, Dr. Jockers,
Yeah.
a little bit as a person. So
Yeah.
first question is, what's your morning routine? We know successful people have their day all ironed out, and
Yeah.
the morning, as you talked about, is a great time to focus and kind of
Oh, yeah.
get stuff done. So share
Oh,
with
yeah.
us your routine.
Well, my routine's changed a little bit now that I am a father of twin boys, right? At the time of this interview, they turned 5 weeks yesterday. So twin boys, my wife can't handle them all by herself. So I try to help her out as much as I can. So one of my goals is I really try diligently to be in bed by 10 o'clock at night, okay? And I wake up at 4. And that's not really what I teach my patients, 6 hours of sleep, just kind of the season that I'm in right now. But what I realize is if I can get to bed by 10 o'clock, right, meaning I'm in bed by 9:45, I feel so good. If it drags out, okay, which it does from time to time, to 10:30, it's like a night and day difference in how I feel when I'm waking up. So anyways, I get up at 4, okay, I go help my wife with the boys, okay, then I take the boys down into my home office so she can get some sleep, right? And I may feed them, things like that, but I'll turn on some good light music, or I'll turn on an inspirational video. I might listen to Brendan Bouchard, or I might listen to a sermon, like an Elevation Church sermon or something like that, something that's inspiring to me. Or I might just put on some light music, meditative music, especially if my boys are sleeping. I'll put that on, meditative music, and I'm walking around, right? I'm praying over my boys while I'm feeding them, or doing wherever I need to do with them, and just kind of getting myself engaged for the day, getting myself excited, inspired. I'm drinking lots of water, like we talked about, really hydrating my body. I like herbal teas, so I'll do several different types of herbal teas, green tea, ginger tea, different things like that. And then, usually, so that's a 4. Usually by 6 a.m., I'm on my computer. I'm going through emails. Starting my day, starting to work, right? So usually it takes me a little bit of time to get the babies all situated, get my mindset ready. I'm doing posture exercises in the morning. I live what I teach, right? So I'm a chiropractor, so I work with people's posture on a regular basis. So I'm doing that myself, working on my posture abnormalities, where head weights to kind of get my head back over my shoulders, a shoulder weight, because one of my shoulders has a tendency to jump up a little bit. So I'm doing mirror image exercises on my spine, and just getting myself ready. And then again, by 6 o'clock, I am at my computer desk starting to go through emails or create content or whatever, major things that I'm working on that day.
Love it. Yeah, a lot of successful people that I've interviewed and talked to, they get up very early. So it's a common theme that we see. So if there was one herb or nutrient or botanical that you just could not live without, vitamin D and omega-3s are covered, what would that be?
That's a great question. I would say turmeric. That's like my favorite. So I try to put that on all kinds of things, and I feel so good. And one of the ways that I found when I'm feeling really good, not only does my brain feel really clear, but my skin feels like really, really soft. Have you ever had that? It's like you just know a difference. Your skin feels really, really soft. And my mom struggled with psoriasis, and I have a tendency where I'll get like some scaly skin on my knees if, let's say, I eat a bunch of sugar or I'm just really inflamed. I notice it with my skin. So I also notice how good my skin feels when I'm having like a lot of turmeric or maybe a green juice or something along those lines, or when I'm in ketosis, my skin just feels really, really good.
Love it. Just curious, milligrams per day, do you recommend anything for 500, 1,000? What do you suggest?
As far as supplements go for turmeric, I don't even actually supplement with it. I just put it on a lot of foods. However, if you are going to supplement with it, get a curcumin extract with ideally like a bioperine or some sort of like a black pepper to help activate it, and always take it with food, ideally a fatty meal, because the fat helps with the absorption. So that's critical. 500 milligrams, 1 gram, can be great. I know a lot of practitioners that will put people on sometimes 4 or 5 grams to really shut down inflammatory pathways for a short period of time with great results.
Yeah, that's powerful. I love cooking with it too. Sometimes the only drawback is it makes your hands orange, but it's doing wonders for your insides, right?
You've got to watch, exactly. You've got to watch out for the staining effect. Yes.
That's amazing. So final question here, Dr. Jockers. If you were to bump in with President Barack Obama or someone from the World Health Organization, and they turned to you and said, what should we know? What sort of health advice would you share with them in 30 seconds or less?
Absolutely. I would really try to focus on low-cost health interventions. I think probably one of the lowest cost health interventions that we can do for people is vitamin D. Vitamin D supplementation can make a gigantic difference in people's lives. Really, to some degree, everybody needs it. Okay, I mean, at least at some level of a small dose. If they put everybody on, let's say, a 2,000 IU vitamin D, just dispensed it, it might cost, I mean, it would barely cost anything compared to the amount of money we're spending on things like vaccines and just Medicare in general. Very low cost, and I think it would have a dramatic effect on reducing the amount of heart disease, cancer, osteomalacia, osteoporosis, autoimmunity, things like that. I mean, just even a small dose, vitamin D3, get it into every single person's hands. And that's something simple. It's like, sometimes it can be tough to get somebody to exercise, right? But taking a pill, our society, we're great at that, you know?
Right, yeah.
So.
And vitamin D is so inexpensive.
So inexpensive. Yeah. And if the government bought bulk on it, you know what I mean? Right? Got some sort of a good amount. I mean, it costs like 50 cents a person, right? I mean, come on.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
David, love talking with you. Thanks for sharing your tips and information.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure, Mike. And I'm a big fan of your work, and just excited to be able to meet you and do this interview with you.
Fantastic. Have an awesome day.
Thank you.